Welcome to another Epic Ethics story, part of the Daniel's Fun Ethics Initiative Elementary School program. As you listen to the story, consider the 4 awesome questions, inspired by the Rotary 4-way test. Is it true? Is it fair? Will it build friendships and community? Will it be helpful to those involved? Stay with us after the story for some thought-provoking discussion questions. And now, The Imaginary Thief, a story inspired by a Chinese fable, by Amy Friedman and Meredith Johnson. Long ago, in a place not very different from the place where you live, people were preparing for their autumn feast. Everyone in the neighborhood was filled with the harvest spirit, baking pies, chopping wood, and settling in for winter. Dakota, the smallest child in the neighborhood, made up for his size with energy and imagination. Everyone loved little Dakota. One day, he walked outside and he smiled at the world around him. He felt the joy of the season down to his fingertips and toes. By afternoon, Dakota was practically shaking with excitement, for he had come up with a plan. He had no messages to bring, no chores to do, but Dakota wanted an adventure. He would travel through the village, stopping at each house and farm just to say hello. Besides, he longed to know what Mrs. Anderson was baking in her blue kitchen, what Mr. McDermott was building in his shed. He hoped to catch a glimpse of Jillian's flower garden and sniff the scent of Dan's woodpile. Oh, he would find wonders everywhere. He always did. Along the quiet road he walked. He stopped for a moment to pet Harriet's dog, Nell, who nuzzled his hand. On he went until he came to a grove of maples. There he knelt down and scattered a handful of nuts he had carried from home for the squirrels. They wriggled their noses in thanks. The geese overhead honked greetings to the child. The wind caressed Dakota's cheeks as he skipped along the road. He couldn't stop. He darted past cornfields, waving at the corn stalks, which waved back at him. He skipped on, singing softly to himself the songs his mother sang to him each night. People looked out from their houses and waved. Jillian handed him a bouquet of flowers. Mrs. Anderson called her children to the window, and, their faces smeared with jam, they waved hello to Dakota. "There's that little Dakota. He's a fine child," Dan said to Mr. Brown, the woodcutter. And they stopped their work just long enough to wave hello. Mr. McDermott peered out of his shed to greet the child. Dakota skipped and pranced until at last darkness cloaked the neighborhood. He sped back home and fell asleep, dreaming of corn maidens and crisp white laundry waving over Mrs. Mott's lawn, and heard in his dream Mr. Salem's hard-working tractor humming as it plowed the wheat fields. The next morning at dawn, Mr. Brown rapped on Dakota's door. When his mother opened it, Mr. Brown said angrily, "That boy is a thief!" He pointed a long, bony finger at poor Dakota, who had just climbed out of his dream-filled bed. "My axe is missing, and we all saw you. You were walking through the neighborhood. You took my axe, you are a thief!" By the end of the morning, everyone had heard the news. "Mr. Brown's axe is missing, and Dakota was out there," cried Mrs. Anderson. "Besides, just look at him. He looks like a thief." "He does, you know," Jillian whispered. "Yes, he does indeed," Dan agreed. "That thief petted my dog," cried Harriet indignantly. Suddenly, the neighborhood no longer loved Dakota. Everywhere Dakota went, he heard whispers. "Thief, thief, thief. you can see it, can't you? You can see it in his eyes." Mrs. Mott stood guard by her laundry. Dan covered his wood pile with the tarp. Jillian cut the last of her blooming flowers and brought them inside. Mr. McDermott put a big lock on his shed. "I'm not a thief," Dakota pleaded, but no matter how he argued, the world around him had changed. And then, one day, as Mr. Brown walked into the woods, Nell came bounding through the trees. She barked 3 times, "Woof, woof, woof," and pawed through a pile of damp leaves. The squirrels gathered around, standing on their hind legs, looking up at Mr. Brown. The geese stopped their flight and honked as loudly as they could. "Honk, honk, honk." "What's this?" Mr. Brown said. He listened to the honks and barks. "What's wrong?" he asked again, and suddenly he saw, beneath a pile of golden leaves, a gleam of metal. He reached down and found his axe. He ran back to the village, the animals on his heels. "I found my axe," Mr. Brown called, waving it over his head. "Dakota's no thief. Why, look at that boy. Anyone can see he's just a little boy full of curiosity." Now everyone looked at Dakota, and sure enough, they saw that the boy looked just as good and curious as every other child in the village. That night, the neighborhood celebrated with a feast. Dakota sat outside, inhaling the scent of sweets and roasting meats and wood smoke. Nell sat beside the child and rested her chin on his knee. The squirrels chattered in the trees. Up in the sky, the moon winked as the geese traveled past, waving their wings. "So much depends upon imagination," Dakota said, and all the animals agreed. The end. Discussion questions. Why do we make assumptions sometimes? What can happen when we assume things without learning the whole truth? How does it feel when someone accuses you of something that you didn't do? In the story, the town people say things like, "Dakota looks like a thief." How is this statement fair or unjust? When have you felt like Dakota must have felt in this story? How can keeping an open mind help us build community? What can we do when we see that someone has been wrongfully accused? This has been an Epic Ethics recording, generously sponsored by the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative. We'd also like to thank Colorado Rotary District 5450 for your service above self and support of peaceful schools. For more information about the Epic Ethics program, or to bring this program to your elementary school, contact us at www.epicethics.org.